This is a continuation of our reading of John Calvin's Institutes of the Christian Religion. Number 11. I am not ignorant, however, and I have no wish to disguise the fact that they endeavor to evade the charge by means of a more subtle distinction, which shall afterwards be fully considered. The worship which they pay to their images they cloak with the same name of idolodulia, and deny to be idolatria. So they speaks, holding that the worship which they call dulia may, without insult to God, be paid to statues and pictures. Hence they think themselves blameless if they are the servants and not the worshippers of idols, as if it were not a lighter matter to worship than to serve. And yet, while they take refuge in a Greek term, they very childishly contradict themselves. For the Greek word lateruin, having no other meaning than to worship, what they say is just the same as if they were to confess that they worship their images without worshiping them. They cannot object that I am quibbling upon words. The fact is that they only betray their ignorance while they attempt to throw dust in the eyes of the simple. But how eloquent soever they may be, they will never prove by their eloquence that one and the same thing makes two. Let them show how the things differ if they would be thought different from ancient idolaters. For as a murderer or an adulterer will not escape conviction by giving some adventitious name to his crime, so it is absurd for them to expect that the subtle device of a name will exculpate them, if they in fact differ in nothing from idolaters whom they themselves are forced to condemn. But so far are they from proving that their case is different, that the source of the whole evil consists in a preposterous rivalship with them, while they with their minds devise, and with their hands execute symbolical shapes of God. Number 12. I am not, however, so superstitious as to think that all visible representations of every kind are unlawful, but as sculpture and painting are gifts of God. What I insist for is that both shall be used purely and lawfully, that gifts which the Lord has bestowed upon us for his glory and our good shall not be preposterously abused, nay, shall not be perverted to our destruction. We think it unlawful to give visible shape to God because God himself has forbidden it, and because it cannot be done without in some degree tarnishing his glory. And lest any should think that we are singular in this opinion, those acquainted with the productions of sound divines will find that they have always disproved of it. If it be unlawful to make any corporeal representation of God, still more unlawful must it be to worship such a representation instead of God, or to worship God in it. The only things, therefore, which ought to be painted or sculpted are things which can be presented to the eye. The majesty of God, which is far beyond the reach of any eye, must not be dishonored by unbecoming representations. Visible representations are of two classes, that is, historical, which give a representation of events, and pictorial, which merely exhibit bodily shapes and figures. The former are of some use for instruction or admonition. The latter, so far as I can see, are only fitted for amusement. And yet, it is certain that the latter are almost the only kind which have hitherto been exhibited in churches. Hence we may infer that the exhibition was not the result of judicious selection, but of a foolish and inconsiderate longing. I say nothing as to the improper and unbecoming form in which they are presented, or the wanton license in which sculptors and painters have indulged, a point to which I alluded a little ago. I only say that though they were otherwise faultless, they could not be of any utility in teaching. Number 13. But without reference to the above distinction, let us here consider whether it is expedient that churches should contain representations of any kind, whether of events or human forms. First, then, if we attach any weight to the authority of the ancient church, let us remember that for 500 years, during which religion was in a more prosperous condition and a purer doctrine flourished, Christian churches were completely free from visible representations. Hence, their first admission as an ornament to churches took place after the purity of the ministry had somewhat degenerated. I will not dispute as to the rationality of the grounds on which the first introduction of them proceeded, but if you compare the two periods, you will find that the latter had greatly declined from the purity of the times when images were unknown. What then? Are we to suppose that those holy fathers, if they had judged the thing to be useful and salutary, would have allowed the church to be so long without it? Undoubtedly, because they saw very little or no advantage and the greatest danger in it, they rather rejected it intentionally and on rational grounds than omitted it through ignorance or carelessness. This is clearly attested by Augustine in these words, quote, When images are thus placed aloft in seats of honor, to be beheld by those who are praying or sacrificing, though they have neither sense nor life, yet from appearing as if they had both, they affect weak minds just as if they lived and breathed." Unquote. And again in another passage in Psalm 112, he says, "The effect produced, and in a manner exhorted by the bodily shape, is that the mind, being itself in a body, imagines that a body which is so like its oven must be similarly affected." Unquote. A little farther on he says, quote, "Images are more capable of giving a wrong bent to an unhappy soul from having mouth, eyes, ears, and feet than of correcting it, as they neither speak, nor see, nor hear, nor walk." Unquote. This undoubtedly is the reason why John in 1 John 5:21 enjoins us to beware not only of the worship of idols, but also of idols themselves. And from the fearful infatuation under which the world has hitherto labored, almost to the entire destruction of piety, we know too well from experience that the moment images appear in churches, idolatry has, as it were, raised its banner, because the folly of manhood cannot moderate itself, but forthwith falls away to superstitious worship. Even were the danger less imminent, still, when I consider the proper end for which churches are erected, it appears to me more unbecoming their sacredness than I well can tell, to admit any other images than those living symbols which the Lord has consecrated by his own word, I mean baptism, and the Lord's Supper, with the other ceremonies. By these our eyes ought to be more steadily fixed and more vividly impressed than to require the aid of any images which the wit of man may despise. Such, then, is the incomparable blessing of images, a blessing, the want of which, if we believe the papists, cannot possibly be compensated.